there was one find that it's maybe not the most flashy find or anything, but I really enjoy it. And that is a very small arrow. It's only 26 centimeters long, and it doesn't have a pointed front end. It has a blunt end. So we think that it was lost in the Lendbrain mountain pass. It's been radiocarbon dated to around 680, so 1400 years ago. It was probably lost by a child. They probably had a break when they got up in the pass, and the child went to practice hunting and lost it in the snow. And probably thought, oh no, it's gone forever. And then it wasn't, right? Because the ice preserved it. It's just so amazing.
How would you even describe what you do?
Yeah. Well, what we're doing is sort of trying to save the history of a melting world. The mountain ice in the high mountains all around the world is melting. And in some places, archaeological finds appear. And our job is to try to be there when the ice melts and try to rescue the finds when they come out. Yeah, the thing is that they are sometimes perfectly preserved by the ice, and they look like they're frozen in time. But then once they sort of melt out of the ice, the clock starts ticking really quickly. And if we're not there to collect them, they will be lost.
Well, like Walt Disney, right? He wanted to be preserved in ice and then...
Yeah, well, it's basically the same thing. You look at it and it doesn't look old, and it can be thousands of years old.
And how do you pick a site where it would be worth going to? Like, I mean, because the ice is melting everywhere. What draws you to a certain area?
I work as an archaeologist in a county in Norway, so we're sort of limited by our administrative borders here. But what we do is that we look at different kinds of ice in the high mountains there. Mm-hmm. We're especially interested in ice that doesn't move, because, I mean, if it starts to move, it destroys everything. So if it's a glacier with moving ice, we normally won't find much. So we look at ice that doesn't move, which is normally an ice patch, as we call it. And then we also often look at ice that is close to the valleys that was settled in the Viking Age, because people would then go from their farms and go up hunting in the high mountains or grazing their animals.
A lost mountain pass, how do you sort of figure out where a lost mountain pass might be?
Lost mountain passes are quite rare in our area. They're more common in the Alps, for instance. But what we do is that we see that they are staying in their farm in the valley in some place. And then we know from historical sources that they needed to go to their summer farms, which may have been 20, 30 kilometers away across the mountain. And sometimes these mountain routes or trails are known, and you can follow those, but sometimes they are not. But you can do analysis on computers to see what was the easiest way to get there, and then you can check for it. But there are still mountain passes out there that we don't know of, that haven't melted out yet.
So does this work start in a library, or oral histories, trying to figure out where certain things might have been? Or how does this work begin before you're up looking in the mountains?
Well, there's a lot of office work first. I mean, we have to look at all the local history, both the oral history and the written down local history. So that's important. But we also look at satellite imagery. If we have, like the last year, we had a really lot of melting, was 2019. And we have satellite imagery of the high mountains then. And we can see where there's old ice that is thousands of years old, where it is in the high mountains. So that helps us also. We have also very detailed digital models of the high mountains, which give us an idea. And we speak to game wardens and reindeer researchers who would tell us where would the reindeer go in the summer when it gets hot. What kind of ice would they go up to? And that will help us.
Because if you know where the reindeer went, you know where the hunters would go?
Yeah, the thing is that the reindeer, when it gets hot, they get both bothered by the heat, but also by botflies. So they try to avoid the botflies by going onto snow and ice, because the botflies don't fly over snow. They are only active when it's really hot. So reindeer go up there during the daytime, stay on the ice, and then when it gets cool in the evening, they will go down to their pastures in the valley again. And of course, prehistoric hunters, they knew that. So they would be hunting them on the way up there, and they would also be hunting them on the ice, because the wild reindeer are very shy. But if you approach them very slowly, carefully and don't make any sudden movements, you can get quite close. And they were hunting at probably 10 to 20 meters, no further away than that.
Lars, I have a question. What got you interested? This is a very particular kind of archaeology, right? I mean, I hadn't heard much about it till we invited you on here. So what was your, interest? And tell me a little bit about the field and what you're trying to accomplish here.
I was a normal lowland archaeologist doing settlement archaeology, but I've always been drawn to difficult and challenging fieldwork, not your usual stuff, but things that are really difficult to handle. And then I got offered in 2007 to join the Glacier Archaeology in our county, and I immediately threw everything else away because it was such a big challenge. It was a new field. I mean, there are finds from the ice that go back to the first part of the 20th century, but there are few. And then, of course, Ötzi came out of the ice in the Tyrolean Alps in 1991. And that was a huge surprise to everybody. But then 6 years later in the Yukon, there was a lot of finds that melted out of the ice there. From there, it's been developing everywhere. And our sort of second wave of finds started in 2006, when we had a huge melt. There was a heat wave in Europe that fall, and we had hundreds of finds melting out. And since then, we've been working in this field, trying to rescue the finds and trying to understand why there's so much human activity in the high mountains. And obviously, it's a race against time, because this is connected to the ongoing anthropogenic climate change. So the ice is melting due to the greenhouse gases that have been emitted and general human activity. And so from what we understand from the climate scientists is that most of the ice here in Norway, perhaps 90% of the mountain ice, will disappear in this century. It's changing everything. So it's a window of opportunity to collect a lot of very interesting artifacts, but it's also a dark background.
Yeah.
When you're doing archaeology in just a field, you're looking at all the things around, to try and find context for the object. Is it different when you're looking for it in a glacier?
Yeah, it's very different, because the natural processes on the sites which transform the archaeological record are very different in the high mountains. So there's ice movement, there's meltwater, there's transportation of wind, and hardly anything that we find was originally lost where we find it. So it's difficult to get sort of the context for the individual finds. They may be well preserved, but in a way, the individual finds have lost a bit of their context on the way. We knew they were used for hunting there, or they were lost crossing a mountain pass, but it's difficult to get beyond that. But if you look at all the finds on a site, it's still possible to extract history from it. Let's say at the Lendbren Lost Mountain Pass, we could see when they started using it around 1700 years ago. When was the highest traffic there? That was in the Viking age. So that also tells us that it was not a remote region, that they were connected to the outer world. And then it sort of faded away throughout the medieval period, probably at least at the end connected to climate change, but also has to do with changes in trade networks, and possibly also the Black Death, the pandemic that hit the area.
You've done a lot of research on Vikings, yeah?
Yeah.
When you're doing that and you find an object, have you gotten any insights into the Vikings?
Yeah, we've learned a lot of things. For instance, we now know that the Vikings were up there in the high mountains in the dead of winter skiing. They were hunting there. They were probably traveling through the area. And that's something we didn't know from beforehand. Then also, as I mentioned previously, that we know that due to the increase of traffic during the Viking period, which was a time of increased commerce and urbanization, we could see that they were in contact with the outer world, and they were transporting their products from the high mountains, which was probably a lot of reindeer pelts, antlers, which were used for combs in the cities. They had a lot of problems with lice. And so we could see that they were connected much more closely than we perhaps thought previously.
So does somebody say, hey, I saw a ski over there, or I saw an arrow over there, or do you go and look? How do you go and look through the ice? Like, I've spent time out in the snow, not any serious amount of time, but if I lose my glove, and it's under the ice, it's almost impossible to find. So how do you figure out where you're going to look?
Yeah, well, most of the finds that were lost in the snow and ice on the sites back in the day, those melted out very quickly, and they get transported down the surface of the ice, and they end up in front of the ice. So what we normally do is that we search in front of the ice and look there. We don't normally hack our way into the ice. Sometimes we have to because we can see that the artifact's still stuck in the ice. A couple of weeks ago, we found a ski that was still stuck in the ice that was 1,300 years old. We had found a ski there 7 years ago, and we were waiting and hoping that the other ski would come out. But we have to wait for the melt. Starting to hack the ice there, it's too much work.
So you figured, well, okay, one ski came out, the other one must be behind somewhere. And so you kept going to the spot where you thought it would come out?
Yeah, we've been monitoring it. We can see that on satellites how far the ice has retreated compared to when we found the first ski. And then when we could see this year that it had retreated, not a lot, but a bit, we sent out an archaeologist to check it out. And he found the second ski. But then we had to return with gas cookers to heat water and ice axes to cut it out of the ice to get it out, because it was, and we also had 30 centimeters of snow in between there. So it's a bit of a struggle, but we got it out. And it's a fantastic find. I mean, it's still got the bindings preserved, so we can now see how the Vikings would have been skiing over 1,000 years ago. That's just so great.
So you have these two skis. Were they cut from the same tree?
No, they're not. So they were used as a pair. I think that's pretty obvious. They are the same sort of type of ski, but they are different. The newest one we found is better preserved, so that may account for some of it. But it's repaired, it's a bit longer, and the back end is different. So I think probably they originally made a pair of skis, but then maybe one of them broke and they took an old one and used it together. The first one we found was birch, and we're not sure about the second one, but it doesn't really look like birch, or it might even be pine or something. So it's two different skis used together.
What does that tell you about the people who made the skis? Was it made communally, or does it seem like it was the guy who lost them? Who made them?
Yeah, they were probably made locally, but by whom we cannot say. But we can say that the fact that they are repaired tells us that they had value, because it's broken in the step, so they had to make quite a heavy repair on it. So of course, we're wondering, why did they leave the skis behind up there? It's possible that there was an accident there and that the skier got hurt, or maybe the skier is still inside the ice there. But it's a bit speculative, but you never know. It's possible.
My question about the ski really is, first of all, can you give us the length of it? And can you determine how big the person was, that was using the ski? How do you know that it's 1,700 years old? How are you able to track the time of that?
Yeah, let's start with the time. It's been radiocarbon dated, so that tells us sort of within 100 years or so how old it is. Secondly, we don't know how large the skier was. That's hard to tell, but the ski in itself is a little over 180 centimeters long, around 3 feet, and it's 17 centimeters wide, so it's quite broad. So it could have been used, for instance, in powder snow or deep snow. It would have been impossible to use it for that. And one intriguing thing that we'd learned this time is that, nobody skis on this type of traditional skis anymore, we thought, but that's not true. People in the Altai Mountains, in the Chinese Altai, they still ski using ancient broad skis. We invited a Chinese skier up here to try out the skis. And he said that he was convinced that they needed to have been fur-lined. All their skis in the Altai are covered with horse fur to gain traction going uphill and to stop them from going too quickly downhill. And we didn't know if ours had been fur-lined. And he said, it must have been. But the second ski we found now, which is better preserved, it has a groove underneath in the middle. And this is not something you would have if you had fur on it. So that shows that it was used with wood without fur. So we learn new things with every new find that comes out of the ice.
The secret arrow site,
Yeah.
how did you find it? And what does it mean that there were so many arrows there? Or just tell us about the site.
Yeah, the secret arrow site, we dubbed it the secret arrow site for a while because we weren't done with the field work there. And we didn't want to attract attention to the site. But the site is the Langfonne site, the Long Ice Patch. And that site was originally found in 2006. And it was found by a local mountaineer and hobby archaeologist called Reidar Marstein. He's been helping us for many years. he's still helping us. He's 75 now and in a much better shape than any of us. So he's up in the mountains all the time. But he found the site in 2006, and the first find he made was a shoe made of hide. And we were completely dumbstruck. Well, what is it? It would look like a primitive shoe, but how old could it be? Could it be Viking age? We got a radiocarbon date, and it turned out that it was 3,300 years old.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was just what? And we didn't understand it. How can it be this old? Because the other finds we had, they were not older than, let's say, 2,000 years. So we were confused. But then we've done a systematic field work on the site. And as often happens, you get the first find and you go, what's this? And then as you work on the site, things tend to explain themselves and they fall into a pattern. And we started finding a lot of artifacts, especially arrows, and some of them dated to the same time as the shoe. So that told us that it was probably a reindeer hunter that lost the shoe. But then we found even older stuff. So the oldest arrows that we have found, they are about 6,000 years old, which is really incredible. But they are not so well preserved, even though they have been inside the ice and probably all the time. We found it on the surface of the ice just as they came out. But there's probably been movement inside the ice at some point, which has damaged the arrows. So they are sort of broken bits of arrow shafts. That's it.
Now, do you, when you find the objects, do you refreeze them?
That depends on what they are. If it's textile, for instance, 10 years ago, we found a complete Iron Age tunic at the Lindbren Pass, and that needed to go into a freezer to stabilize it. And the same also if we take samples, there's horse dung up there from the Viking Age. If we take samples of that also needs to go into the freezer. And also stuff that could be sampled for DNA, that also needs to be frozen down. But the wood, not so much. A lot of the wood has naturally freeze-dried up there, so it doesn't get better from lying out, but it doesn't break down as quickly as, let's say, we found a Viking Age mitten at Lindbren. That would have broken down quickly. We found it just as it came out, but the wood can preserve for years. So it depends on what kind of material you find.
Now, do you find artifacts, like, is it all presumed to be men? Are you seeing artifacts from children or women, or, are you able to determine that?
Yeah, we do find, especially at the Lindbren site, we do find artifacts that are related to, that we say this is probably from women, or even in one case from a child. We have found evidence that the people, that probably women, were spinning wool when went through the pass. We found what we call a distaff for holding the wool, which was quite common in the old days because they didn't sort of waste any time. If they were walking, they would spin at the same time, spin the wool. I think the pass was used for transport between the summer farm and the farm. And normally, often the women and children would spend time in the summer farm, and the man would traditionally travel between the summer farm and the main farm.
When you find the thing for spinning, do you even know what that is when you find it?
Yeah, when we found it, we didn't know what it was because we'd never seen anything like it. It turned out later on that there was, in fact, a similar find in the Oseberg Viking ship burial from around 1,200 years ago, but we didn't know what it was. So what we did is that we have a social media account called Secrets of the Ice, and we put it out there and we asked people. So we don't know what this is. Do you know what this is? And it took half an hour and we got like 10 responses saying, yeah, this is a distaff. Obviously it is. Are you guys not spinning? So no, sorry.
That's an amazing thing. Could you trace to, who and sort of what part of the world they were giving you the insight?
This was mainly people from Northern Europe, which were into the Vikings. So Viking reenactors, they have a lot of knowledge about Viking Age material culture that even us specialists don't have. But getting back to the child find, there was one find that it's maybe not the most flashy find or anything, but I really enjoy it. And that is a very small arrow. It's only 26 centimeters long, and it doesn't have a pointed front end. It has a blunt end, and it's so short that we have had people telling us it's for hunting squirrels or birds or something, but archery specialists say it's no way, they don't have enough impact energy to harm anything. So what we believe that is that it's a toy arrow. So we think that it was lost in the Lendbrain mountain pass. It's been radiocarbon dated to around 680, so 1400 years ago. And it was probably lost by a child. They probably had a break when they got up in the pass, and the child went to practice hunting and lost it in the snow. And probably thought, oh no, it's gone forever. And then it wasn't, right? Because the ice preserved it. It's just so amazing.
Yeah.
You said before, were there some genetic finds or DNA? You know,
Yeah, not human DNA. We haven't worked on that, but there's a lot of biological material in the ice as well. So the ice, I mean, we're concentrating on the artifacts, obviously, with our line of work, but we also collect the biological material, but most of that is natural, mostly reindeer, but it can also be like sheep, because there are wolverines in the high mountains, and they will attack the sheep, kill them, and then bury them in the snow as a sort of food cache. So there's a lot of biological material that we can learn from, and especially the reindeer, because you find reindeer mandibles, the teeth, they're very good for extracting DNA. And you can then use that to see how the DNA matches earlier and later reindeer finds in the area. And you can see other reindeer, back then they were the original wild reindeer, but today it's mostly domesticated reindeer. How do they differ? And there's been a very interesting study that we were not involved in, but does explain a lot, is that DNA analysis shows that just after the end of the Viking Age, there was a genetic bottleneck for the reindeer. So it shows there were very few reindeer left. And that fits well also with the Langfordner site that we spoke about, because we can see there's a lot of arrows from that time, but there's hardly any reindeer material at all. The reindeer material in the ice is mostly natural. They would kill the reindeer and remove the bones and antlers. So we don't find that when they hunt. So they probably nearly exterminated the reindeer at that time. It was not only the hunting on the ice, there are also mass trapping sites as well. But it has to do with the markets developing for the reindeer products, and they go away from what we will call a sustainable hunt to just basically killing the reindeer for short-term profit.
Do you have a sense of like how cold it was then, you know, sort of were they out there all year round? What's the differential, and how much warmer are we now, or if you know?
Yeah, well, obviously climate has been changing over time. And a lot of people think that the ice that we have in our high mountains now are remains of the huge glaciers and ice masses that were there in the Ice Age, and then has been sort of melting since then. But the story is completely different. I mean, if you look at the Norwegian high mountains, there was hardly any ice there 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. We were in a warm period, the Holocene thermal maximum, as they call it, and that was caused by changes in the planetary orbit. So nearly all the ice was gone. That's why we can't find organic materials that go beyond that sort of date. But after that, the ice came back, and then it's been growing over time. The trend has been up, but it's been going back and forth. But that's the glaciers. The ice patches are different. They react much more quickly to changes in weather and climate. The glaciers are more sluggish. You can better study the climate using those than you can use the ice patches.
You know, Rangor, the gentleman who knew about the hidden arrows. How do you say his name?
Radar, yeah.
Radar. You know, so who is he? Because he just knows the ice because he's wandered in these mountains for a long time.
Yeah, he has a fantastic story. But he grew up locally and worked locally. He was a furniture carpenter until he retired. But ever since he was a little boy and went fishing in the high mountain, he's been looking at pitfall traps for reindeer or old house sites and found it really interesting. So he's been surveying the high mountains and documenting the history there in great detail. And then in the late 1990s, he started reading about people finding arrows and stuff in other mountains. And said, but there should be a chance here. And he had a specific place he went to. That was the Langfordner site that we talked about, and other sites in the same mountain region. And he went up there each fall hoping to find something coming out of the ice. But what he didn't know at the time, and we hadn't thought of it at all, was that this was a time when there was a lot of snow. So the late 90s, the ice patches were really big and all the finds were covered by snow and ice. But he just kept going. And then in 2002, he made his first find at the Storfone ice patch, which is a neighbor ice patch to Langfone. And then in 2006, he discovered it. But so he has a vast knowledge. I've been in the mountains with him a lot of times. It's so fantastic because he knows the nature, he knows the history, and it's a natural part of him. He's just as happy to see birds or reindeer as he is to find arrows.
Are there a lot of people like that who just wander the ice patches? Is there, he seems almost like a Viking himself in a way,
Yeah. In one way, he is. There are not a lot of those, no. But we do get reports from mountain hikers, and especially now because there's so much media focus on our work, we do get reports from people who are going up and say, "Oh, but I found this," and we tell people don't collect the finds. That's the first thing we say, unless it's some place where you thought it may be lost very quickly. But take a picture showing us where it is in the landscape and the GPS coordinates so we know we can find it. And then we will go up and collect it. And it works pretty well. We don't have a lot of problems with looting of sites that you might find in other places.
A lot of these are at the edge of the glacier. So how are you thinking about that? Because it's floated out of the ice to this one place where you can find it. Does it become traditional archaeology there, or is it still ice archaeology?
The techniques we use for surveying the site, the systematic techniques for surveying the site, are the same techniques that we use in the lowlands, except that we don't walk in straight lines as we do in the lowlands, following the furrows in the field, but we follow the edge of the ice back and forth. And then we need to walk very closely together because of the rough surface, no more than 2 meters. And we need to stop and look around to see if there's something hiding behind stones that we could not see because of the angle. So it's very slow work. But then we put down a marker, the survey continues, and then after a while, we'll send out the finds team, and they will measure the find, photograph it. So that's basically the same as you do in surveys in the lowlands. But of course, you don't have the problems of getting sudden snowfalls during the night in August, as we get right on occasions in the high mountains. You have to be prepared for everything up there.
So how long do you go out for? How long does it take you to get where you're going? And, how long do you go for?
Well, it depends on the sites. I mean, there are sort of normally three steps here. If it's what we call an exploratory survey, we will just basically travel very light, go up to the site in the morning, do a survey, collect a few of the finds for sampling, and then just go down again. Once we found the site and there's a lot of finds, we need to do a base camp survey. So we will go up there. We've been using helicopters, but we can see the ice melting. We don't want to burn fossil fuels. So we changed that to now we use either human carriers or we use pack horses where that is available. And we set up a base camp with a mess tent and individual tents, and we spent up a week, 10 days up there surveying the sites. But some of the sites are so large that we just can't do it in one campaign. The Lendbrain site was surveyed for years before we were able to cover the whole area and could go on to then what we call the third phase, which is the monitoring of the site. That's where, you collected everything that had come out of the ice. The next time you need to go up is when you can see that the ice has retreated again. And then you only survey along the ice until you see that, okay, we got everything. And you can do that in a day or two.
Are there things that surprise you when you find them?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things that surprise me. I'm still stunned about the preservation. I mean, we have arrows that come out that they look like you could put them in onto your bow and start shooting with them. That's just unbelievable. There are many finds that intrigue us. Like, for instance, we found small bits of juniper wood that we didn't understand what they were. But once again, we were helped not by the internet this time, but by a local old woman who had used the same kind of bits when she was working on summer farms in the 1930s. And they were placed in the mouth of goat kids or lambs. And they were for preventing them from suckling their mothers because they needed the milk for cheese.
Oh.
And we had no idea, but he had used those. And he said, yeah, they are invariably in juniper because that's a very tough wood. And so was ours. But the thing is that ours was from the Viking Age. And for me, that was just incomprehensible, that there was the same tradition, still living in the same area for 1,000 years. That's just incredible. And I'm also intrigued by the fact that we do find remains of clothing in the mountain passes. It's the same in the Alps, and you also find it in the Himalayas. And in the Himalayas, they are often connected to people who are freezing to death. And in the last stages of hypothermia, they will start undressing because they feel really hot. And that could be the explanation for some of the finds that we make up at the ice. But we still haven't found an ice mummy. And people often ask, do you like to find an ice mummy? And I will claim that any glacial archaeologist who says that he or she doesn't want to find an ice mummy is not being perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Because you can learn so much from mummies, but the chances are low.
Why would the chances be low? Because wouldn't they bury the people up there?
Yeah, the thing is that, I mean, people died in the high mountains back in the Viking Age and before that. We know that. I mean, you can look at the Ötzi find. That's 5,300 years old. He died up there, or was killed, actually. And we found weapons and stuff up in the high mountains, which also indicate that somebody died on the spot, but it's been off the ice, so the body is not preserved. So you would have to have people die on ice. And then not on glaciers, because they move and the ice gets renewed and the body breaks down. So it has to be on non-moving ice. And then they need to stay on the surface for a while to freeze dry. Otherwise, the body fat attacks the body and they fall apart. Their bodies from the First World War in the Tyrolean Alps, which have been found recently due to the melt, and they are very poorly preserved. So that has to happen. And then also they must not be found. I mean, if somebody gets lost in the high mountains, I presume that relatives would start looking for them. They would then have to have been lost and not found. So it probably would have to be somebody who was a stranger that nobody was looking for, because obviously the birds and wildlife would draw to the find spot. And you can see many of these places from the valleys. So, I mean, the chances are low, but we do have a mummy kit prepared, just in case. We don't want to end up in the situation they had with the Ötzi find, where they caught him out with a pneumatic drill and ski poles. That's rather not.
Where else would you like to go? I mean, you mentioned the Himalayas, but where are some other places where this great work is going on?
Well, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in North America. So that's obviously interesting in the Rockies.
Wow.
Especially the wider Yellowstone area. And there's been stuff going on in Alaska. And there's stuff in Western Canada, Yukon, Northwest Territories. And there's also recently, and very intriguingly, also been finds reported from the Mongolia side of the Altai Mountains by a guy called Will Taylor from the University of Boulder, Colorado. So he's doing work there, and there's work in the Alps. But the thing is that glacial archaeology is one very specific subdiscipline connected to the melting of glacial ice. But there's also other melting going on, like permafrost melting. So there's a lot of very interesting finds from permafrost, for instance, from Greenland, from North America, and from Siberia. So there are many places where you can make interesting discoveries.
Lars, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. A couple of questions for the audience. So where can they learn more? And also, where do all these artifacts go to one place so that, we can look online and sort of see where would we send people?
Yeah, well, I think the main place to start would be our website, thesecretsoftheice.com, where there's also links further on to our social media. So that's where they can see our finds. We also cover the finds of our colleagues in different parts of the world, and also in Norway, if there's something interesting coming up, which there is quite often. And also the finds are curated by the museum in Oslo. But we have been lucky enough that they are exhibited in the local mountain museum, the Norwegian Mountain Museum in Lom, where it's possible for people to see what I normally refer to as our greatest hits from the ice. Both the ski that I talked about earlier, the remains of pack horses, remains of sleds, the arrows, scaring sticks that they used to hunt the reindeer, all the stuff we found there. And We are very committed to putting our finds online. So if you look through our social media content, there's a lot of finds. We normally put them out within hours of when we make the discoveries.
Thank you so much. It
Yeah,
was
thank
wonderful
you.
to speak with you. Stay warm. I mean, I'm cold just talking to you. I put my heater on.
Thank you, Lars, very much. This was
Yeah, thank you
fascinating
for
and
having
great
me.
work. Yeah, great
Yeah,
work.
thank you.